Good morning. Welcome to Harmony of the Gospels. We are going to teach lesson number 58 today. Lesson number 58. This is the healing of the withered hand from the man that was on the Sabbath day. And so the overall thought process on this is it compassion or is it legalism? Okay. So is it about compassion or is it about legalism? Well, what's it about? Okay. Now, just want to let you know, I'm going to change up my teaching for this channel a bit. So I may teach some lessons in Proverbs. All right. So I've been teaching lessons in Proverbs with a friend of mine at Heritage Baptist Church. And so I may teach some of those lessons on every other weekend, okay? So I want to make sure people are aware. So I hope you enjoy those lessons as well. So next weekend, not this weekend, but next weekend, we're going to teach one of those lessons, all right? Okay, so the healing of the withered hand on the Sabbath day. So is it about compassion toward others or is it about legalism? All right, so we're going to be in three separate texts today. The first text is Matthew 12, verses 9 through 14. Then Mark 3, verses 1 through 6. And then Luke 6, verses 6 through 11. All right, so in the book of Matthew, chapter 12, verses 9 through 14, let's read that to open this lesson up. And when he was departed thence, he went into their synagogue, and behold, there was a man which had his hand withered. And they asked him, saying, so the people around this man with the withered hand asked Jesus, okay, so they asked him, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath days, that they might accuse him? So one person asked that question. There are many other people thinking that same thought. It's as if Jesus had been set up, and they had brought this man with a withered hand in to set Jesus up. All right. So Jesus said unto them, what man shall there be among you that shall have one sheep, if it fall into a pit on the Sabbath day? Will he not lay hold on it and lift it out? How much then is a man better than a sheep? Wherefore it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath days. Then he said unto the man, stretch forth thine hand. And the man, he stretched it forth, and it was restored whole, like as the other. So like as the other hand. Verse 14, then the Pharisees went out and held a council against him, how they might destroy him. So this is pretty interesting now. So let's say a quick word of prayer, and then we'll get started. Oh Lord, I thank thee for your scriptures. Please bless the reading of your scriptures this morning. Please help us to understand this portion of the scriptures as we expound it to folks. And Lord Jesus, I praise thee and thank thee for all that you do. I look forward to your return, O Lord, in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right, so we're going to use all three accounts in this lesson today and tie them all together like I normally try and do. So in all three accounts, there is a man with a withered hand that is brought into a synagogue for the purpose of confronting Jesus. That is the appearance here. And you've got all of the Pharisees and Sadducees around this man, ready to confront Jesus about the Sabbath day, okay, whether it's right to heal on the Sabbath day or not. So in Luke chapter 6, verse 6, it states, and it came to pass also on another Sabbath, so this was another Sabbath, that he entered into the synagogue and taught. So Jesus had a custom that on the Sabbath day, that he would go into some synagogue and he would teach wherever he was at. Now, so Jesus had this custom. And there was a man whose right hand was withered. So there was a man there in the audience, probably near the front, sitting, had a withered hand. Okay, he was put there on purpose. So let's look at the synagogue first. All right. So when you look at Matthew 12, verse 9, Matthew makes this statement. It's an interesting statement about the synagogue that Jesus went into. It's an interesting statement. So when he was departed thence, he went into their synagogue. Okay? The term their synagogue is interesting. Okay? It's not our temple. It's not God's temple. It's their temple. So it's their temple. All right? Never let your heart become so cold or hard, okay, so that it's your own selfish heart, okay? Never let it get that way, all right? Always let your heart be humble, be malleable within God's will so that your heart belongs to God. Never let it become your own selfish heart. That's a dangerous place to be in. In Matthew chapter 23, verse 38, Matthew 23, verse 38, when Jesus is looking over Jerusalem, he's looking over Jerusalem and he's weeping, okay? He states, behold, your house is left unto you desolate. You know, right before that, Jesus said, as a hen, I would have covered you in my wings, you know, to protect you. But he says, behold, your house is left unto you desolate. This is a scary place to be, when God will just give you up to your sin, you know, and he'll let you have it. And as a Christian, when you're in that situation, it's likely God's going to take you off this earth, okay? He's going to let you have your sin and just see how bad it is, all right? All right, so in Matthew chapter 12, verse 10, it states this, and behold, there was a man which had his hand withered. So his hand was withered, it was curled under or whatever, or maybe like that, I don't know. It was withered, okay? And they asked him, so the people in the around, someone stood up and said, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath days? They might accuse him. Now, Jesus had already come in there to teach, okay? It's likely he may have been teaching, all right? As was his custom. And this man was sitting there, and then someone, after he got done teaching, someone stands up, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath days, that they might accuse him? In Mark 3:2, it states, and they watched him whether he would heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. So they brought the focus of the situation on this one man, okay, that's sitting there with his withered hand. So everyone watched him, okay, whether he would actually heal this guy, okay, that had been brought to Jesus' attention. In Luke chapter 6, verse 7 through 8, and the scribes and Pharisees watched him, okay, so the scribes and Pharisees were watching Jesus, see what he was going to do. All right, whether he would heal on the Sabbath day, that they might find, so they wanted to find an accusation against him, but he knew their thoughts, okay? So Jesus knew what was going on. So Jesus wasn't oblivious to what was going on there in front of him, okay? He wasn't oblivious that the man with the withered hand was sitting there. Now, the people around Jesus may have thought, well, Jesus doesn't recognize this guy. You know, we're going to bring it to his attention once he gets done teaching and reading. So they bring him to his attention. All right, so I love God's word. There's always so much depth in the scriptures when you read it and actually study each word. So first, Jesus knows your thoughts. Never forget this. Jesus knows your thoughts. Never forget this. Jesus knows your intentions, okay? Whether your intentions are right or wrong. Jesus knows it all, okay? Jesus knew the thoughts and intentions of the Pharisees and scribes, and they were all thinking, well, would Jesus heal on the Sabbath, okay? Maybe, as Jesus finished teaching, the question was asked, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Okay, maybe that's when this question came up. This question was on the minds of all the people in the room that were sitting around this man, because the man had been placed there on purpose, okay? So the question now that we should ask, was this man with the withered hand planted there by the Pharisees or Sadducees? I mean, to me, I believe the man was planted there. I believe the Pharisees, Sadducees were trying to set Jesus up. So now, if this is so, because the scriptures seem to show this, they seem to show this in all three accounts, that the man was in the synagogue with the scribes and Pharisees. He was there with the scribes and Pharisees as a focal point with them around the guy. And so they were all around this man. So with this one question on their minds, because now we've got Jesus. We're going to get him this time. So here, there are two further questions that come out of this thought process that we're thinking about. So So the scriptures here beg for me to ask these two questions, okay? So J. Vernon McGee also pointed this out on the subject, and I love his writings. And once he said, by doing this, by actually bringing this man with a withered hand into the synagogue, setting him up front, okay? So by doing this, the Pharisees and Sadducees had admitted that Jesus had the power to heal the sick that no one else did. Jesus had this interesting power to heal the sick. The enemies of Jesus never questioned his ability to perform these miracles, okay? The Pharisees freely admitted that he had the power to heal the sick. This is the one reason why the man was planted here at this time and place, okay? So you think about this. Legalism is dangerous. Legalism is dangerous, okay? Number two, they also acknowledged that Jesus was compassionate, caring, and loved, and would always heal if someone was put in front of him to be healed. So Jesus was moved with compassion to heal this man on the Sabbath day, which is what the Pharisees and scribes had hoped for, because Jesus was a compassionate man, okay? It's beautiful, all right? So from these two thoughts, it is strange that there are two separate views here, okay? One was Jesus, okay? He was compassionate. He was full of love and care for others, no matter what day of the week it was. From the other view, from the Pharisees, was legalism, with reference to the legality of healing on the Sabbath day, okay? All right? So the Pharisees had designed this event to trap Jesus, but Jesus actually traps them in their own rules, okay? The whole idea is that if someone was not dying, then you couldn't heal them on the Sabbath. But if someone was dying, you could heal them on the Sabbath. Okay, that was the whole idea, you know. All right, so in Matthew chapter 12, verse 11, Jesus points out the problem in the reasoning of the Pharisees and scribes. And he said unto them, so Matthew 12, verse 11, and he said unto them, what man shall there be among you that shall have one sheep, if it fall into a pit on the Sabbath day? Will he not lay hold on it and lift it out? Okay. So this is a wonderful question that Jesus proposes, which comes from the law in Exodus chapter 23, verses 4 through 5, and Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 4. So both these scriptures back up this thought that Jesus is talking about. So in the law, if you were a neighbor, okay, to one who had an animal, and the animal had fallen in a hole, and it was on a day, okay, any day of the week, you as a neighbor were supposed to help. Now this law was right there with the laws on the Sabbath day. So the thought was it was tied to the Sabbath day, and Moses meant it for the Sabbath day. So that means that even the man who had the animal that fell into the pit and the neighbor as well were supposed to help out and pull this animal out of the pit. So consider animal rights activists today, okay, that have zero compassion for the human fetus, all right, and the abortion activities that go on today. It's pretty fascinating when you look at the two sides here. More compassion over an animal than over a human fetus, okay? Horrific, all right? In this country, you can abort a child after birth and face no repercussions. But do that to an animal and someone find out, it would probably make headlines around the country, and they'd probably try and take you to court, you know? Kind of crazy, isn't it? Yeah, weird, all right? So when you think about what's going on here that Jesus is dealing with. So that this idea here that right there on the Sabbath day, if your animal falls into a pit, guess what? You can lift it out, you know? All right, so Jesus now takes these scriptures from Exodus chapter 23, verse 4 through 5, and Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 4. Then he asks the questions in Matthew 12, verse 12. So he states this, which is pretty fascinating. How much then is a man better than a sheep? Wow, right up front, okay? And this is a question for all of America, you know. How much then is a man better than a sheep? How much is a man or is a human fetus better than an animal? Okay, think about that. How much more better? Yeah, a human fetus is so much more better. Okay, think about all the women that have had abortions around this world and in this country right now, and so many abortions go on every day here. You think about all of the scientists, all of the presidents, all of the, the intelligent, wonderful people that have been killed. Maybe all of the, all of the compassionate people that have been killed. Think about it. It's horrific. Okay, you may have had, the new Van Gogh, killed. All right, and these people that just don't care in this country. They don't care for life at all. It's terrible. Okay. So this is the bottom line, okay, what Jesus is saying here. So, is a man better than a sheep? Wherefore is it lawful to do well on the Sabbath day? So is it lawful to do well on the Sabbath day? Absolutely it was lawful, okay? All right, so this is the bottom line. Should not Jesus show compassion and love on the Sabbath? And so it's an excellent reasoning thought. There's probably many in the audience like, oh, wow, okay, Jesus is doing lawful on the Sabbath, okay? All right, should not he do good on the Sabbath, which the law allowed? Jesus actually had them now in their own trap. He had trapped them rather than them trapping him. It's amazing. In the traditions, the rabbis prohibited healing on the Sabbath unless it was feared that the victim would die before the next day. The man with the withered hand was in no danger of dying. Okay, so the Pharisees, Sadducees were arguing that Jesus should wait until Monday to heal the guy. Not Monday, but wait until the beginning of the week. So because they were having Sabbath on a Saturday. So when applied to the loophole about the sheep, so the person is allowed to go out and pull that sheep. Well, the sheep fell into the pit. I got to pull him out. Okay, all right. The sheep, guess what, is in no danger of dying. It's just in the hole. Okay, but the law allowed you and a neighbor to pull the sheep from the pit. Okay, think about it. All right. Amazing. Now in Luke chapter 6, verse 8, Jesus knew their thoughts and said to the man which had the withered hand, rise up, stand forth in the midst. So this man, he's sitting somewhere in the front. He rises up and he stands forth with Jesus in the midst so everyone can see this guy with the withered hand. He's like, okay, they want this guy to be the focus of attention. I'm going to bring him to the focus of attention so everyone can see him. All right. Okay, Jesus directs a man to stand in the midst of the people where he was teaching. The teaching point in the temple was designed so that all could see in the temple that were listening. Okay, all right. Okay, so, and they could observe what the teacher was getting ready to do. So by having the man in front of everyone, there would be no question about the healing. So Jesus asked this final question. And so he's not getting an answer about the question from Matthew 12:12. How much then is a man better than sheep? Wherefore is it lawful to do well on the Sabbath days? Jesus is waiting for an answer. No one answers. So he tells the man to rise up, stand forth in the midst. So the guy stands forth. So Jesus gets no answer. Okay, then he says in Luke 6, verse 9, then Jesus said unto them, he says, I will ask you one thing. So one thing more. Is it lawful on the Sabbath day to do good or to do evil, to save life, or to destroy it? Okay, he asked that question. Okay, is it lawful? Okay, Jesus had been enduring questions and attacks from the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now, while in their house, remember when I said their house, okay, while in their house, takes the initiative by putting the questions to them and everyone in the synagogue. The question put forth is very ironic, since Jesus knew their thoughts. He knew their thoughts, all right? Okay? Jesus was ready to heal with compassion. Jesus was ready to do good on the Sabbath, all right? But the Pharisees here were plotting to put Jesus to death for doing good on the Sabbath. Fascinating, very ironic. It is obvious who was guilty of breaking the law. It was the Pharisees and Sadducees. In Mark 3, verse 4, the last part of this verse states, but they held their peace. They said nothing. They didn't want to be caught in their own trap. And they knew that they were trapped. So Jesus knew the evil intentions. He knew the hardness of their hearts. He knew their hardness. He knew their legalistic views on following the Mishnah. Okay, he knew it. All right. All right. So terrible. In Mark 3, verse 5, it states, so he was standing there. The man was in the midst. He'd asked these questions, and he could see the hardness. Okay. So when he had looked around about them with anger. So Jesus looks around with them, is like, wow, these are hard, evil men. Okay. And so he has a flash of anger, and he began to be grieved on the inside. These people wouldn't understand. Okay. He grieved for the hardness of their hearts. He saith unto the man, stretch forth thine hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored, whole as the other hand. Now, I'm going to add an excerpt here from J. Vernon McGee and Dr. Graham Scroggie. J. Vernon McGee states this, that Jesus broke through all of the red tape in the Mishnah, all of those traditions, okay? And he got to the very heart of God's original purpose for giving the Sabbath day to Israel. They would not answer Jesus because they knew that would incriminate themselves, that they would just incriminate themselves, okay? Notice here that the Lord looks around with anger. You can put it down in your memory that Jesus could get angry, okay? Okay? Now this was righteous anger. Now, Dr. Graham Scroggie, he notes the word anger here is in the aorist tense in the Greek, and it carries a sense of a momentary flash of anger. Okay? The Greek word for grieve here is used in the present tense in the sense of a continuing grief that the scribes and Pharisees were so hard. So when you take this into consideration, when he looked around about them with anger, just a flash of anger, but not a grudge, not with malice or a forethought, okay? It's a flash of anger. But being grieved for the hardness of their heart. So the grieve was something that Jesus was always carrying with him because he could see their hardness, you know, and Jesus was grieved that no one could understand. He also had that awful grief always on him because their hearts were always hard. So when Jesus looked around for the final time before he would heal the man, he was looking to see if there was any person with compassion or reasoning about what he had just brought forth in the hearts of the people, okay, that were gathered around him. Jesus saw only hardness, that no one cared, no one desired to reason on the words that he had just spoken. Can you imagine the feeling of being in an audience like that? Okay, so there was anger, then grief, then Jesus heals the man. So the hand was restored as perfect as the other hand. So in Luke chapter 6, verse 11, it states, and they were filled with madness, okay, because they were caught, okay, they were filled with madness, and they communed one with another on what they might do to Jesus. They immediately started talking there together in the audience, communicating in hushed tones, all right? And this would often happen when there was a serious situation in a temple. So during this time, the Pharisees and scribes had absolute control over the population when it came to religious matters and things of traditions in the Mishnah, okay? These Sadducees so there was also, so you had the Pharisees and scribes, then you had the Sadducees and Herodians. Okay, the Sadducees and Herodians also had influence in other matters in the society. So the scribes and Pharisees on one side, Herodians and Sadducees on the other side. All right, they were in disagreement with each other. Okay, so the Pharisees and scribes on one side, Herodians and Sadducees on the other side. They were in disagreement. Now the two groups, they did not get along and often would not even come to an agreement because there was such a stiff piece of disagreement between the two sides, right? Right after the healing, they were filled with such madness because they knew that Jesus was correct. And due to the hardness of their hearts and unwillingness to break with their own traditions, they could not reason with the words of Jesus. So, as the book of Isaiah chapter 1 verse 18 states, "Come now, let us reason together, thus saith the Lord." All right? So, how do you reason with the Lord? You reason in humility, knowing that His word is true. There was no desire in the Pharisees and scribes to reason with Jesus. So what happens? Okay. So when you think about this, all right, the scribes and Pharisees, they were sitting in Moses' seat. Okay. So in John chapter 3, verse 10, when Jesus is reasoning with Nicodemus, and Nicodemus is having a difficult time with the words of Jesus, Jesus puts it to him in John chapter 3, verse 10. "Art thou a master of Israel, and knowest not these things?" Okay, they're pretty clear. They're written really well in the Old Testament. They're very clear. The Mishnah had distorted much of the Old Testament. So the Pharisees, they sat in Moses' seat, and they were masters in Israel, but they did not understand the Old Testament, nor did they reason with the words thereof at all. Okay, so what did they do? So this is what happens. You have the two sides. Okay, Pharisees, scribes, Sadducees, Herodians. So this is what happens. Well, when you have a serious issue like this in a society, a lot of times two sides will come together, and this is what happens. Okay, so you get two evil sides come together. Mark 3 verse 6 states it best. "And the Pharisees went forth, and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against Jesus," okay, against him, how they might destroy Jesus, how they might get rid of Jesus. All right, it's pretty sad. So the Pharisees had had enough with Jesus, so they contacted their opposition to come together against Jesus. Wow, amazing. The Herodians favored the Herod dynasty and were supporters of Rome, which is how the Herod family received their authority to rule. Now the two sides finally come together in opposing Jesus because they feared that Jesus might have an unsettling political influence on the people. So kind of crazy, all right? So this is where they're going now as we go through this harmony of the Gospels. So thank you very much for listening today. I hope you have a great and wonderful day. Thank you so much.